Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Monday morning, September 17th, and it's a beautiful day right now. It's going to be quite warm today in northern Illinois area, but looking forward to it. It's going to be a lovely last week of summer. All right, so wanted to talk a little bit about Joan of Arc, which was written by Mark Twain, and he did a lot of research for this book. He spent like 12 years looking at the court documents and traveling to France to find out where she lived and the places where she stayed. Okay, and his biggest dilemma was how to approach this book, because everything we know about Joan of Arc comes from the court records, those documents from years and years and years ago. She had two trials, basically. The first one, where she was found to be guilty of heresy by the church and she was burned at the stake. And the second trial, which happened about 24, 25 years after she was killed, where she was found innocent. And the church basically said that, she was an innocent person, and the original findings by Couchon, I think that's what his name is, Bishop Couchon, were invalid, and he was found to be a heretic of the church because he was swayed by political motivations. When he was trying Joan of Arc, his loyalties were with England, and the English government was sort of, from what I understand, they were kind of dangling the archbishop position for him if in fact he found Joan of Arc guilty of heresy or something that would cause her to be killed. Because really, Joan of Arc, she was growing to be a larger-than-life figure. She was motivating the French people, rallying them to the cause of freedom against the English, and they wanted to discredit her name before they killed her, because if they would have just downright killed her, ended her life prematurely like they did, she would have become a martyr. But if they would have found, or had the church found her to be a heretic, in the mind of the English anyway, that really would have quieted the French people down. It would have dissolved their resolve to follow Joan of Arc into battle, because she was a witch, basically, is how the English saw it. She was inspired by the devil to do these acts against what they consider to be her sovereign, which is England, which is not the case, because she's a French native and she's supposed to be loyal to the French crown. Now, the French king at this time, he was a very, very weak leader, okay, and he really wasn't doing anything to help the French people when Joan of Arc comes on the scene. Now, this is happening during the 100 Years' Wars, and of course the campaigns that Joan was successful in helped start the journey to the end of the 100 Years' War, where eventually England was pushed out of France and France became a sovereign state entirely once again. But anyway, so Mark Twain, he has this dilemma, how do I make court records speak about her entire life in an interesting way? So he comes up with this idea. He has Louis de Conte be a clerk that has always been with Joan of Arc for her whole life, this storyteller. He's going to narrate this story about Joan of Arc. And he's an old man when the book starts. He's like 82, 83 years old. So as the reader considers it, here's this old guy telling the story about Joan of Arc. First of all, what reason would he have to lie? And certainly there'd be no political motivation for him to kind of twist and change history. So Mark Twain is trying to establish de Conte as being a truthful narrator that has no political agenda. He wants to just tell the story. Okay. And it's successful, I think, because as the story develops, the narrator, even though he's telling the story, kind of takes a back seat to the action. I mean, he's involved in the scenes to a minor extent, but the action The storytelling is all about Joan of Arc. It has very little to do with Louis de Conte. The story is emotional. It's deep, like any good book. It's multifaceted. Certainly a person who is interested in history could read Mark Twain's Joan of Arc and come away satisfied. Now, it is a work of fiction simply because Louis de Conte is fictional. He was a clerk in this story for Joan of Arc. He never existed in that capacity. But a lot of the events, a lot of the facts that come about or happen in this book are right out of the pages from the witness testimony from the court documents. Sorry. Looks like there's a plane taking off. And, where was I? So, in one sense, the book is fiction, but on the other hand, it's balanced with a lot of facts that are interjected in this book. And it does follow the timeline of Joan of Arc's life very, very, very tightly, very closely. So it's a reliable source to get information about her life in one respect, but at the same time, you can't quote everything out of this book. For example, there is a scene where the siege of Orleans is lifted by Joan of Arc, and the Frenchmen are escorting and marching the English soldiers out of the city, and they're going to release them. And there's a scene where one of the Frenchmen runs up to one of the English guys and just beats him over the head and bludgeons him, and the Englishman is dying. And Joan of Arc saw this, so she runs up. Historically, this is that we know, that she runs up to the Englishman, kind of holds him and reads him his last rites. Now, Mark Twain kind of fills in the gaps for us by making up who the person was that hit the Englishman, and he kind of makes up some of the exact words that were said by Joan of Arc to the guy that was dying. Okay, but that event, did happen where Joan of Arc was comforting her enemy, as he was dying, as he was being told read his last rites by Joan of Arc. So it shows the compassionate side of Joan of Arc. The book definitely shows her inspiration that she had as an individual to lead other men into battle and to really take action where the king was not taking any action at all. He was an ineffective leader, but Joan of Arc fills in and really establishes her place in history by doing what the king would not do. The voices that Joan hears is mentioned. A lot of that is taken right from the witness accounts and Joan of Arc's own words at her court trial. So certainly, if you're a church historian, you can look at it and see that this is an example of God's divine influence directly changing the course of history. Okay? From a humanist side, you can see it as, and I think this is the way Mark Twain kind of read it and interpreted and wrote it, was that the voices were whatever they were, but it was Joan's action that really started to change the course of French history. Okay, so I don't think at any point does Twain say that these are divine voices in the fact that it's true. He just accepts it as a matter of Joan's life is taken from the court records, and doesn't go any further with that. He doesn't read into the voices as saying it's divine inspiration from God. He does allow the reader to interpret that, but he's not making a religious statement by this book. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. He's just basically trying to tell her story as accurately as he can, while trying to smooth, the stories from all these different witnesses. There's 115 witnesses that testified at her second trial, so he's smoothing the statements from all these witnesses into one voice. And it makes sense. It makes the story readable. It moves along quickly. You can grasp all the different facets from the different witness statements into just one abbreviated voice, and it works really well. So when Twain says that this was his greatest work, I can see why he thinks that, because of that fact, because he's blending so many different voices and so many different perspectives into one storyline and harmonizing it. Okay, so from a literature standpoint, it works very well. Also remember that historical fiction was not huge when Twain was writing. Typically, if you're writing a historical novel, you did it factually, and you wanted to have a strong ethos, okay? Where, in this case, Twain was going for the pathos. He's going for the feeling. He wanted people to connect with Joan of Arc and understand her perspective and really perhaps reevaluate her place in history. At the very end of the book, Twain makes a statement that this person, will never be seen again. That she's a unique person, that her role as a woman in society certainly changed history, but at the same time, more importantly, she was a great person. And if you want to know what a great person is, Twain is saying that you should look to Joan of Arc to start your definition, to start your evaluation of what a great person is. So, great book. Glad I read it. I was surprised that Twain wrote this novel. Most of his books are humorous. They have a lot of social commentary, and this book refrains from that. It's really designed just to tell the story and life of Joan of Arc and generate interest, so that if you read it, you might go out and start looking at her manuscripts, which you can do for free. I mean, I read them at the Indiana State University has them online for free. I think Notre Dame has them too. So there's places you go out there and read the transcripts, the trial transcripts for free. But anyway, hope this video helps a little bit and shows you a little bit about what Mark Twain was trying to do with it. But hope you enjoyed the video. And if you've read the book, leave me your comments if you liked it, didn't like it, and what you thought about it. All right, take care.